Everything you know about Caligula is a complete lie. They told you he was a monster, a genetic abomination born of pure, unadulterated evil. The history books, written by the very men who murdered him, painted him as a raving lunatic. A mad king who bathed in blood, slept with his own sisters, and tortured innocent souls for sheer entertainment. They spoon-fed you this twisted narrative for 2,000 years. Why? Because they were terrified you would find out the bloody truth. Forget the caricatures. Forget the myths of madness. Step back into the blinding sun of Rome, the year 37 A.D. Listen to the deafening roar of the Colosseum. The streets of the eternal city were not running red with the blood of the innocent. They were paved with the hope of millions. When this 24-year-old boy ascended to the most powerful throne on the face of the earth, the Roman Empire did not cower in fear. They wept with joy. They hailed him as a savior, a living God walking among mortals, sent to wash away the brutal, paranoid tyranny of his predecessor, Tiberius. Caligula did not begin his reign with the sword. He began it with the keys of liberation. He shattered the chains of political prisoners. He threw open the dungeons that had swallowed Roma TM's brightest minds. He publicly burned the treason records, the very documents that could have condemned his enemies to death. He abolished the crushing, suffocating taxes that had starved the plebeians for a generation. He hosted spectacular games, raining gold down upon the poorest citizens. For 6 glorious, intoxicating months, Caligula was not the devil. He was the golden boy of the greatest empire humanity had ever seen. He was beloved. He was untouchable. But this golden age was nothing more than a fragile illusion. A fleeting whisper of peace before the ultimate nightmare descended upon the Palatine Hill. The senators of Rome, the wealthy, the corrupt, the untouchable elites, watched his every move from the freezing shadows of the Senate floor. The very men who bowed the lowest in the sunlight were quietly sharpening their daggers in the dark. Caligula was about to learn a terrifying lesson. The true monsters of Rome were not sitting on the throne. They were standing right beside it. The golden era shattered exactly 7 months in. In the autumn of 37 AD, a mysterious and devastating illness struck the young emperor. For weeks, Caligula hovered on the razor-rod mace edge between life and death. The common citizens of Rome wept openly in the streets, holding midnight vigils outside the palace gates. They prayed to the gods to spare their beloved savior. But inside the freezing marble halls of the palace there were no tears. There was only the quiet, calculating hum of treason. As Caligula lay paralyzed by a burning fever, drifting in and out of consciousness, he witnessed the terrifying reality of Roman politics. The Senate, the very men he had shown mercy, the men whose treason records he had publicly burned, were already circling his deathbed like vultures. They were not praying for his recovery. They were placing bets on his last breath. They were quietly carving up his empire, whispering in the shadows about who would seize the throne the moment his heart stopped beating. And then, the impossible happened. Caligula opened his eyes. He survived. But the optimistic, merciful boy who had fallen into that bed did not wake up. He died in the fever dreams. The man who rose from the ashes was someone entirely different, cold, calculating, and utterly disillusioned. Caligula had looked into the abyss of the Roman elite, and the abyss had looked back. He finally understood the brutal, unforgiving rules of the game he had been thrust into. Kindness in Rome was not viewed as a virtue. It was viewed as a weakness, an open invitation to be slaughtered. He realized that you cannot rule a den of vipers with a warm smile and an open hand. To survive the Senate, you must become the deadliest serpent in the pit. The history books call this the moment he went mad. They claim the fever boiled his brain and shattered his sanity. But look closer. Look past the propaganda of the elites. This wasn't a TMT madness. It was an awakening. Caligula wasn't by TM. Losing his mind. He was losing his patience. He knew that the only way to protect himself, and the common people who genuinely loved him, was to strike absolute, paralyzing terror into the hearts of the aristocratic class. If they wanted a monster, he would give them a monster. The golden boy was dead. The era of survival had begun. Let Atames talk about the horse. If there is one story that defines the dark legacy of Caligula, it is this. The mad emperor, who tried to appoint his favorite horse, Incitatus, as a Roman consule, the highest, most prestigious political office in the empire. For 2 millennia, historians have pointed to this single event as undeniable proof of his absolute raging insanity. But when you strip away the aristocratic bias and look at the brutal context of Roman politics, a very different picture emerges. This wasn't a symptom of lunacy. It was a weapon of mass humiliation. Caligula wasn't trying to elevate an animal. He was trying to destroy the egos of the men in the Senate. He looked at the corrupt, bloated politicians who had plotted his death. The men who believed their aristocratic bloodline made them untouchable gods. And he sent them a crystal-clear, devastating message. Oh, my horse can do your job better than you. Oh, it was a brilliant, lethal mockery of the Roman aristocracy. And he didn't stop there. The hammer fell with terrifying precision. Caligula unleashed a rain of psychological and financial terror, but his target wasn't the common people. He aimed his fury squarely at the 1%. He began executing senators who whispered treason in the dark. He seized their vast inherited estates and drained their bottomless treasuries to the last coin. But what did he do with that stolen wealth? He didn't hoard it in the palace. He poured it directly back into the empire. He funded massive public works, built vital aqueducts, secured the trading harbors, and fed the mighty Roman legions. He systematically humiliated the untouchable elites and redistributed their wealth to secure his own survival. To the patricians who held the pen of history, these actions were the ultimate acts of a bloodthirsty tyrant. But to the average Roman citizen watching the corrupt upper class finally face the consequences of their greed, it was nay, madness at all. It was justice. But in Rome, justice comes with a heavy price. By humiliating the most dangerous and wealthy men in the empire, Caligula had unknowingly signed his own death warrant. By the year 41 AD, the tension in Rome had reached a boiling point. The air inside the Palatine Palace was thick with paranoia. Caligula knew they were coming for him. His response was not to retreat, but to escalate. He pushed the Senate to the absolute limit. He demanded to be worshipped as a living deity, forcing the aristocrats to prostrate themselves before him. He was building an impenetrable fortress of psychological dominance. He believed that if he made himself a god, mortal men would dare strike him down. But the elites were backed into a corner. Their wealth was drained, their pride was shattered, and their lives were completely at the mercy of a man who despised them. They realized that waiting for Caligula to die naturally was a luxury they could no longer afford. He had to be removed, radically, brutally. The conspiracy was born not from the Senate floor, but from the very men sworn to protect him. The Praetorian Guard. January 24th, 41 AD. Caligula was walking through a dark, narrow underground corridor beneath the palace, returning from the theater. He was completely isolated from his loyal German bodyguards. It was the perfect trap. Cassius Chaerea, a hardened military commander of the Guardico, a man Caligula had relentlessly mocked for his high-pitched voice, stepped out of the shadows. There was no trial, no grand speech, just the blinding flash of cold steel. The first blade struck Caligula in the jaw. The second pierced his chest. As the emperor collapsed onto the freezing stone floor, his assassins descended upon him like a pack of starving wolves. They hacked at his body relentlessly, delivering over 30 brutal stab wounds. The golden boy of Rome, the emperor who tried to break the system, bled out alone in the dark. But the assassins didn't stop with him. To ensure his bloodline could never seek revenge, they hunted down his wife and smashed his infant daughter, Tamatsea's head against a stone wall. The elites had finally taken their revenge. The assassination of Caligula is not a story of a madman being put down for the good of the empire. It is a terrifying masterclass in the ruthless mechanics of power. The moment Caligula took his last breath, the Senate faced a massive problem. The common people and the military still loved him. If the public believed the Senate had murdered a champion of the people to protect their own wealth, Rome would have burned to the ground in a violent revolution. They needed a justification. They needed a scapegoat. And so, the ultimate smear campaign in human history was born. The senators and their historians picked up their pens and began to write. They erased his economic reforms. They buried his acts of mercy. They magnified his eccentricities and fabricated stories of unimaginable depravity. They painted over the portrait of a politically astute, utterly disillusioned survivor and replaced it with the caricature of a drooling, incestuous psychopath. They didn't just assassinate the man. They assassinated his memory. And their lie was so perfect, so masterfully crafted, that we are still repeating it 2,000 years later. Caligula, IamTM's true tragedy, was not that he went mad. His tragedy was that he forgot the darkest, most unbreakable rule of human history. When you declare war on the wealthy, the corrupt, and the powerful, they will not just kill you. They will hold the pen that writes your history. And in the end, the system always wins.